The crystal chandeliers cast diamond patterns across marble floors, slick with champagne and ambition. Marcus Caldwell raised his glass, his voice booming over the string quartet's delicate melody. 200 faces turned toward him, investors in tuxedos, board members in emerald green gowns, journalists with cameras poised, to the future of Caldwell Industries. His teeth gleamed white against his tanned face. $3 billion. 3 generations of excellence. Then he saw her. A black woman in an ivory uniform moved between tables, champagne bottle angled precisely, refilling crystal flutes with practiced invisibility. Her movements were economical, professional. She didn't look up. Marcus's smile fractured. His voice cut through the music like shattered glass. "What the hell are you doing near the VIP table?" The quartet stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Grace Moreau's hand steadied on the bottle. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "No fear, no submission. Just calculation. I asked you a question." Marcus stepped forward, his royal blue tie loosening as his face reddened. "Can't you people follow simple instructions? Stay in the kitchen where you belong." The room held its breath. Cameras captured everything. The sneer on his lips, the stillness in her posture. The 200 witnesses frozen in their expensive silence. Grace set down the bottle with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot. Marcus leaned closer, bourbon thick on his breath. "Worthless. That's what you are. A worthless black maid who doesn't know her place." She didn't blink, didn't speak. Her eyes held something he couldn't name, something ancient and patient and utterly unafraid. He would learn its name soon enough. 48 hours earlier, Grace Moreau had stood in a different kind of silence, the pre-dawn quiet of her studio apartment, where law books lined walls like fortifications. At 52, she moved through the world as a ghost by choice, a strategist by necessity. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing hotel bathrooms, turned pages of corporate merger documents with the precision of a surgeon. She was both things at once, a maid who cleaned executive suites, and a consultant who reviewed the contracts signed in those same rooms. She'd learned long ago that invisibility was power. Companies paid her cash under the table to review their legal documents, never asking why a cleaning woman understood fiduciary duty clauses better than their own attorneys. They took her brilliance and erased her name. Grace didn't mind. She'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of being overlooked. Her daughter Maya's photo watched from the nightstand, 23 years old. Brilliant. Her scholarship application rejected for the 3rd time by institutions that claimed they valued diversity. Grace had memorized the rejection letters. Polite words that meant, "Not you, not yet, not ever." Meanwhile, Marcus Caldwell had inherited his empire at 25. He was everything Grace had learned to navigate around, 3rd-generation wealth wrapped in an armored suit, a man who believed his success was earned rather than bestowed. Caldwell Industries had built its fortune on hostile takeovers, crushing smaller competitors, silencing dissent with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Tonight's gala celebrated his greatest triumph yet, a $3 billion merger with Hartman Global that would cement his legacy. The contract would be signed at midnight, witnessed by the elite who never questioned how empires were built. Grace had reviewed every page of that merger 2 days ago. She'd found something they'd all missed. The universe had a sense of irony. When the luxury hotel called desperate for last-minute servers, Grace had said yes. Extra money for Maya's next application. A chance to see the signing ceremony in person. She hadn't known she'd be serving the man who held her daughter's future in his careless hands. She hadn't known he'd give her the perfect reason to use what she'd discovered. Sometimes justice didn't need to be summoned. Sometimes it simply showed up wearing a maid's uniform. Grace had been invisible for exactly 90 minutes before Marcus Caldwell made her scene. She'd moved through the ballroom like water, refilling glasses, clearing plates, existing in the peripheral vision of people who never truly looked, The other servers, mostly young, mostly white, worked the VIP tables. Grace stayed on the edges, observing. The merger documents were spread on a gold-trimmed table near the stage. Marcus held court beside them, his laughter too loud, his hand too familiar on his assistant's shoulder. He was on his fourth bourbon, confidence swelling with each sip. Grace approached table 7 to clear abandoned champagne flutes. She didn't realize how close she'd moved to the VIP section until his voice cracked like a whip. "Hey!" Marcus's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "Did I say you could be near this table?" Grace froze. His fingers pressed into her pulse point, his class ring cutting into her skin. She didn't pull away. That would show weakness. She simply stood, bottle in one hand, his hand circling her wrist like a shackle. "I'm clearing the glasses, sir." Her voice was level, professional. "As instructed." "As instructed?" His laugh was ugly, performative. He turned to his audience of investors and board members. "Did you hear that?" "She thinks she follows instructions." Someone coughed. A woman in a lavender gown looked away. Marcus released her wrist and pushed her back a step. "Let me be clear, so even you can understand. People like you don't belong near people like us. You serve from a distance. You don't touch our tables, our drinks, our space." Grace's hand tightened on the champagne bottle. Every instinct screamed to respond, to educate this man on exactly who she was and what she could do. But she'd survived 5 decades by knowing when to be silent. His VP, Elena Rost, stepped forward. "Marcus, perhaps we should what?" He wheeled on Elena, his face flushed. "Let the help forget their place. This is my company, my event, my rules." He turned back to Grace, leaning close enough that she could count the burst capillaries in his nose. "Apologize for thinking you could stand near your betters." Now, the cameras were rolling. 200 people watched. The moment crystallized, a crucible where dignity and survival converged. Grace met his eyes. She didn't apologize. She didn't defend. She simply looked at him with an expression that said, "I see exactly who you are." Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, her back straight, her steps measured. Behind her, Marcus's voice rose in triumph, already spinning the incident into a joke about maintaining standards. He didn't see Elena pull out her phone, didn't notice the disgust rippling through his board of directors, didn't understand that he'd just given Grace Moreau the final piece she needed. Sometimes a man's arrogance is the rope he hangs himself with. Marcus had just tied the noose. The kitchen's fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps. Grace set down the champagne bottle, her hand finally trembling now that no one could see. Steam from industrial dishwashers clouded the air, turning everything soft and indistinct. She pressed her palms against stainless steel, feeling the cool metal anchor her to the present. Her wrist throbbed where his ring had cut her skin, a thin red line already darkening to purple. "Know your place." Her father's voice echoed across decades. Samuel Moreau, civil rights lawyer, brilliant and broken by a system that used his mind but denied his humanity. He'd taught her the same lesson Marcus just had, but with different words. Stay invisible to survive. Grace had perfected that invisibility, built a life in the margins, raised a daughter on brilliance that couldn't be claimed, saved every dollar for a future that kept receding like a mirage. Maya's last rejection letter sat in her purse. "We regret to inform you." Polite words that meant, "Not you, not yet, not ever." But something had shifted tonight. Not in the room, in her. Grace thought of her briefcase locked in her car, the merger documents inside, the clause she'd drafted 6 months ago when Caldwell's attorneys hired her anonymously to review liability concerns. They'd paid her $2,000 cash and never asked her name. She'd written the inclusion clause as standard protection, requiring unanimous shareholder approval for mergers exceeding $2 billion, a safety measure against hostile takeovers. Caldwell's lawyers had liked it, implemented it, forgotten about it. Grace pulled her phone from her apron pocket. Her reflection stared back from the black screen, a woman who'd spent 52 years being overlooked, Not tonight. She opened her banking app and navigated to documents she hadn't reviewed in years. Her father's estate file, the 200 shares of Caldwell Industries stock he'd received as severance when the company fired him in 1987. Shares he'd refused to sell out of spite. Shares Grace inherited and forgot about, until now. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The mathematics were elegant, inevitable. Marcus needed every shareholder's signature. Every single one, including hers. Grace was 7 when her father taught her the first lesson about power. They sat at their kitchen table in South Philadelphia, contract law textbooks spread between plates of cold dinner. Samuel Moreau had just lost another case. A black family evicted despite paying rent. A landlord who rewrote lease terms in invisible ink. Baby girl, listen close. His finger traced lines of legal text. The law is a language. You learn it, you can rewrite the rules they use against us, Grace learned. Absorbed precedent and procedure while other children played. Watched her father draft airtight contracts that white lawyers claimed as their own. He never complained. He was building something larger than ego. When Grace turned 16, Samuel died. Heart attack at 49, courtesy of stress and systemic rage. He left her 3 things: law books, 200 shares of Caldwell Industries stock, and a lesson she didn't understand until tonight. Power isn't what they give you, he'd said the week before he died. It's what you already have that they don't know about. Grace had earned her law degree through night school, cleaning offices to pay tuition. She'd graduated top of her class and couldn't find work. Every firm wanted diversity optics without diverse power. They offered assistant positions, paralegal roles, anything that kept her brilliant and silent. So Grace became a ghost. She consulted anonymously, drafted contracts for companies that never knew her face, built other people's empires from the shadows. She learned which spaces to occupy and which to avoid, and she raised Maya alone. Her daughter inherited Samuel's mind, sharp enough to cut glass. Maya wanted to be a civil rights attorney, like the grandfather she'd never met. But scholarships went to students with connections, recommendations from people who mattered. Maya had brilliance. She didn't have access. 3 rejections this year alone. Grace had swallowed that rage the way she swallowed everything, quietly, privately, converting it to fuel for the long game she didn't know she was playing, until Marcus Caldwell grabbed her wrist and spoke his truth out loud, until she remembered the clause she'd written, the shares she'd inherited, the power she'd been carrying all along. Her father had taught her to read the language of law. Tonight, she would teach Marcus what it meant when the invisible learned to speak. Grace sat in her decade-old Honda, parked 3 blocks from the gala's golden lights. Her briefcase lay open on the passenger seat, papers scattered across worn leather. The merger agreement. 147 pages of corporate language that most people skimmed and few understood. Grace read every word there. Section 12, subsection D. All mergers exceeding $2 billion USD in total valuation require written consent from 100% of registered shareholders of record. She'd drafted that clause herself 6 months ago. Caldwell's legal team had hired her through an intermediary. A common practice. When companies needed expertise, they wouldn't credit. They'd paid her $2,000 to review and strengthen their merger protocols. Grace had done exactly that. She'd inserted ironclad protections against hostile takeovers, requiring unanimous shareholder approval for any deal over $2 billion. At the time, it seemed like standard corporate governance. Now it looked like prophecy. Her phone screen glowed with the shareholder registry she'd accessed through her old consulting credentials. The list contained hundreds of names, institutional investors, hedge funds, board members, and at the bottom, easy to miss, Moreau Gracie, 200 shares inherited 1987, 200 shares, worth perhaps $30,000 at current market value. Nothing compared to the institutional millions, except tonight. They were worth everything. Grace's hand shook as she cross-referenced the signing ceremony schedule. Midnight. Marcus would sign surrounded by press and board members, making his triumph official. The merger documents already bore signatures from 99% of shareholders, but not hers, and without her signature, without every single shareholder's consent. The merger was void. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of this moment settle across her shoulders like her father's hands. She could drive home, cash out her shares tomorrow, take the 30,000 and disappear back into her careful invisibility. Or she could walk back into that ballroom and remind Marcus Caldwell that power isn't about who shouts loudest. It's about who reads the fine print. Her wrist still throbbed where his ring had cut her. Maya's rejection letter sat in her purse. Her father's lesson echoed, "Power is what they don't know you have." Grace gathered the documents, straightened her uniform, and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. The same face that had been invisible for 52 years looked back at her. Tonight she would be seen. She opened the car door. The night air tasted like champagne and gasoline and something else, something that felt dangerously close to justice. The ballroom had transformed into a cathedral of capitalism. Spotlights converged on the signing table where Marcus stood, golden pen poised above documents that would reshape his empire. Cameras flashed like lightning. Investors applauded before anything was official. Grace entered through the service door, her uniform marking her as furniture. She moved along the wall unnoticed until she reached the press section. Then she stepped into the light. "Excuse me." Her voice cut through the celebration. "I need access to that table." Security materialized instantly. 2 men in black suits with earpieces and suspicion. Marcus glanced up from his performance, irritation flickering across his face when he recognized her. Someone remove this woman. He didn't lower the pen. "Now." Grace pulled the shareholder certificate from her pocket, its aged paper crackling. "I'm a registered shareholder. I have the right to review merger documents before signing." Marcus's laugh echoed off marble walls. "You, a shareholder?" He turned to his audience, eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief. "This is the maid I mentioned earlier. Now she's claiming to own part of my company." The crowd's laughter was uncertain, polite. They wanted this to be a joke. Grace walked forward. Security blocked her path but didn't touch her. Cameras made them cautious. She held up the certificate, close enough for Marcus's attorney to see. The attorney, a gray-haired man in a cobalt blue suit, stepped forward. He examined the paper, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to something close to panic. He leaned toward Marcus, whispering urgently. Marcus's face drained of color. "That's impossible. Moreau Estate. 200 shares. Registered 1987. Grace's voice never wavered. "And according to Section 12, subsection D of the merger agreement, which I drafted, you need my signature." The room fell into shocked silence. Elena Rost watched from the shadows, phone still recording. Board members exchanged glances. Journalists sensed blood in the water. Marcus recovered quickly, his smile stretching too wide. 200 shares. That's what? $30,000. Name your price. 50,000. 100,000. No. The word landed like a guillotine blade. Marcus stepped closer, voice dropping to a venomous whisper, meant for her alone. "You don't understand what you're doing. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work again. That daughter of yours, Maya, isn't it? Her scholarship applications? One phone call and..." Grace's expression didn't change, but her eyes, they burned. "Try it," she said softly. "See what happens when you threaten me on camera." Marcus glanced around, suddenly aware of the phones raised, the lenses focused. His empire hung on her signature. His legacy balanced on her silence. And Grace Moreau had spent 52 years learning that silence could be louder than any scream. The attorney spoke first, his voice tight with professional panic. "Mr. Caldwell, the certificate is legitimate. Ms. Moreau is listed on the shareholder registry. Marcus grabbed the paper from his attorney's hands, staring at it as if force of will could change the words. Around them, the ballroom held its breath. $3 billion hung suspended on a single signature. This is extortion. Marcus's voice rose. She's been planning this. Infiltrating my event, pretending to be a maid. Grace finished. I'm a maid. I clean hotel rooms. I also review corporate contracts. Sometimes for your own legal team. She paused. Anonymously, of course. Elena stepped forward from the crowd, phone extended. Marcus, you should stop talking. He wheeled on her. You're fired. Actually, Elena's voice was ice. I quit. 20 minutes ago, right after I sent this recording to the board's private server. She tapped her phone screen. Marcus's voice played back, distorted slightly but unmistakable. Worthless black maid. People like you don't belong near people like us. The journalists surged forward. Questions erupted like shrapnel. Board members clustered together, their faces grave. Investors checked their phones, watching stock prices plummet in real time. Marcus turned back to Grace, something desperate replacing his arrogance. What do you want? Money, position, name it. Grace looked at him, really looked, and saw everything he'd never had to learn. The ease of inherited power, the confidence of unchallenged privilege, the blindness that came from never having to see. I want, she said quietly, exactly what you tried to take from me tonight. Dignity, respect, my place. She turned to the attorney. I'm invoking my right as a shareholder to request an emergency board review of this merger's ethical compliance. According to corporate bylaws, any merger can be suspended pending investigation of fiduciary duty violations. The attorney's face went gray. He knew she was right. Worse, he knew she knew corporate law better than he did. Marcus lunged forward. Security caught him. He struggled against their grip, his carefully constructed image shattering like the champagne flutes scattered across abandoned tables. You can't do this. His voice cracked. Do you know who I am? Grace met his eyes one last time. Yes, she said. I know exactly who you are. She handed the unsigned merger documents back to the attorney, then walked toward the exit. Behind her, chaos erupted, investors demanding answers, board members calling emergency meetings, journalists narrating the collapse in real time. The last thing Marcus Caldwell saw before security escorted him to his office was Grace Moreau's back, straight and unbowed, disappearing into the night that would swallow his empire whole. Grace's apartment felt smaller at 3 a.m. The gala's chaos had followed her home through her phone, endless notifications, news alerts, messages from numbers she didn't recognize. She sat at her kitchen table in darkness, still wearing the ivory uniform. Her wrist throbbed. The red line had deepened to purple-black, Marcus's ring imprinted on her skin like a brand. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. You're an opportunist, a race baiter. You planned this. Another. Gold digger using the race card for a payout. The comment sections were vicious. Half celebrated her courage. Half accused her of manipulation. Grace had become a symbol overnight, for justice or greed depending on who was watching. She turned off her phone and stared at Maya's photo. Her daughter's smile so much like Samuel's, full of hope that the world kept trying to crush. Had she done the right thing? Marcus was collapsing, yes, but Grace's face was everywhere now. Her carefully constructed invisibility, shattered. She'd spent 52 years staying hidden, and now strangers dissected her life on social media. The silence pressed against her eardrums. No victory felt like this, hollow and terrifying and irreversible. She thought about calling Maya, but what would she say? I just destroyed a billionaire, and I don't know if it was worth it. Grace pulled her father's old briefcase from the closet. Inside his law books, the shareholder certificate, a photo of him at 30, young and brilliant and doomed. She traced his face with one finger. Did I do right, Dad? Her voice cracked in the empty room. The silence didn't answer. But somewhere in the stillness something shifted. Not certainty. Just the faintest whisper that maybe invisibility wasn't the only way to survive. Her phone buzzed one more time. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the name, Eleanor Rost. Eleanor's text was simple. "We need to talk." Not on the phone. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Federal Building. Grace arrived 20 minutes early, nerves humming. The Federal Building loomed in grey concrete and suspicious windows. Eleanor waited on the steps, dressed in a burgundy suit, her corporate armor exchanged for something sharper. "You came." Eleanor's relief was visible. "Should I have brought a lawyer?" "You should be one." Eleanor handed her a manila folder. "But first you need to see this. Inside, a decade of documents. Discrimination complaints filed against Caldwell Industries. Settlements paid quietly. NDAs signed hastily. 23 employees, mostly black and brown, pushed out after reporting racist incidents." Grace's hands trembled as she read. "These were all buried?" "Marcus's specialty. Pay enough, threaten enough, and people disappear." Eleanor's voice hardened. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years. HR manager before VP, I saw everything. Why didn't you go public?" "Same reason you stayed invisible." Elena met her eyes. "Fear, practical survival. Until last night, when you showed me what courage actually looks like." Grace turned pages. Each complaint read like a variation of her own humiliation. Different faces, same dehumanization. A facilities manager fired for questioning racial jokes. An analyst demoted after reporting harassment. A male clerk terminated for attitude problems after refusing to accept being called boy. There's more. Elena pulled out a flash drive. Audio recordings. Marcus didn't know his office phone system backed up to a server I controlled. 5 years of conversations. Racist jokes. Discriminatory hiring decisions. Financial irregularities. Grace stared at the drive. This could destroy him completely. He's already destroying himself. Stock dropped 40% overnight. Board called emergency meeting for tomorrow. But here's the thing, they'll try to contain this. Fire Marcus, quietly, settle with you, bury the evidence, unless we give them no choice. Elena leaned forward. The board meeting is at noon tomorrow. If you show up with this evidence and demand they review his entire tenure as CEO, they'll have to act, publicly, completely. Grace thought of her apartment, her quiet life, the invisibility she'd traded for survival. Then she thought of Maya's rejection letters, of her father's death at 49, of 23 other people whose careers were destroyed by a man who faced no consequences. "I'll be there," she said, "but I need something from you. Name it, testimony, on record, about what you witnessed." Eleanor smiled, fierce and tired. "Already written. I've been waiting years for someone brave enough to use it." They stood on the Federal Building steps as morning commuters streamed past. 2 women who'd survived by staying small, now choosing to take up space. Grace tucked the folder under her arm. The weight felt right. Not burden, ammunition. "One more thing," Elena said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, win or lose, you already changed everything. You showed them we're not invisible unless we choose to be." Grace nodded. But she wasn't done choosing. The boardroom occupied the 42nd floor of Caldwell Tower, all glass walls and walnut furniture. 12 board members sat around an oval table, Marcus at the head looking hollow. His royal blue tie hung loose. Grace entered at precisely noon, Elena beside her. Security tried to block them. "Ms. Moreau is a registered shareholder," the board chairman said wearily. "Let her in." Marcus's face twisted. "This is a closed meeting." "Not anymore." Grace set the manila folder on the table. "I'm invoking my rights under corporate bylaws to present evidence of fiduciary misconduct." The chairman, Gerald Winters, 70, grey as his suit, gestured to empty chairs. "You have 10 minutes." Grace remained standing. "I'll need less." She opened the folder. 23 discrimination complaints filed against Caldwell Industries in the past decade. All settled quietly through NDAs. Total payout $4.7 million in company funds. Papers slid across polished wood. Board members leaned forward. These are sealed settlements, Marcus's attorney protested. They're evidence of a pattern. Grace's voice never wavered. Systematic racial discrimination. Hostile work environment. Retaliation against employees who reported abuse. She pulled out the first complaint. Jamal Crawford, facilities manager. Fired in 2019 after reporting that Mr. Caldwell referred to him using a racial slur. Settlement $380,000, Marcus shot up. That's a lie. He was terminated for performance. There's a recording. Eleanor stood, connecting the flash drive to the room's display. August 14, 2019, Marcus's office. His voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. That boy Jamal thinks he can complain about me? Get him out. I don't care what excuse you use. Silence absolute. Devastating, Grace continued. Sarah Martinez, senior analyst. Demoted after maternity leave. Settlement $290,000, another recording. Marcus's laugh. She wanted to have kids? That's her choice. My choice is not paying her to do less work. Board members' faces shifted from skepticism to horror. One woman, Margaret Chen, independent director, covered her mouth. Grace laid out complaint after complaint. Each one detailed. Each one verified. The pattern undeniable. And this. Helena pulled up financial records. $3 million in company funds transferred to offshore accounts, registered under Marcus's wife's maiden name. Disguised as consulting fees. Marcus's attorney stood. These accusations are documented. The chairman's voice cut like steel. He'd been studying the papers, his expression darkening with each page. Gerald, these settlements were never disclosed to the board. They're standard HR matters, Marcus stammered. Not board level. $4.7 million isn't standard. Margaret Chen turned to him. You signed fiduciary duty agreements. Every settlement over $100,000 requires board notification. Grace watched Marcus's foundation crack. His arrogance had been armor. Now it shattered, revealing the frightened man beneath. This is a conspiracy, he tried. She's orchestrated this because I called her a worthless black maid. Eleanor held up her phone. In front of 200 witnesses? While grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise? She projected the video on the screen. Marcus's face twisted with contempt, his hand circling Grace's wrist. His voice, "People like you don't belong near people like us." The room watched in silence. When it ended, no one spoke. Gerald Winters removed his glasses. Marcus Caldwell. As chairman of this board, I'm calling for an immediate vote on your removal as CEO and termination from the board of directors. You can't. All in favor. 12 hands rose. Every single one. Marcus looked at them, at Grace, at the evidence scattered across the table like his empire. For a moment he seemed about to speak. Then something collapsed behind his eyes. Security entered. They didn't drag him. He walked out on his own, each step heavier than the last. The door closed. Grace stood in the silence, feeling the weight of 52 years lift from her shoulders. 3 weeks later, Grace returned to Caldwell Tower. Not as a maid. As a guest. The boardroom looked different in morning light. Gerald Winters stood at the window, watching the city wake below. Ms. Moreau, thank you for coming. Grace wore mustard yellow, her daughter's favorite color. Maya had helped her pick it out, hands trembling with pride. The board voted unanimously. Gerald gestured to a chair. We'd like to offer you a position. Director of Equity and Compliance. Salary, benefits, and a seat at this table. Grace sat slowly. The chair felt foreign, powerful. Why me? Because you saw what we refused to. Gerald's voice carried shame. 23 complaints. We ignored everyone. We chose comfort over accountability. He slid a document across the table. Marcus is facing federal charges. Wire fraud, discrimination, tax evasion. The company is implementing mandatory anti-discrimination training, transparent reporting systems, and a victims' compensation fund. Grace read the contract. The salary was 6 figures. The power was real, I accept, on one condition. Name it. A scholarship fund, full ride for minority students pursuing law. Named after my father, Samuel Moreau. Gerald nodded. Done, Grace signed. Her first official act as a board member. That evening she drove to Laurel Hill Cemetery. Her father's headstone was simple granite, worn by Philadelphia winters. She placed the shareholder certificate on the grass. We did it, Dad. Exactly like you taught me. The stone stayed silent, but Grace felt something shift in the air, like exhaled breath, like released burden, like justice finally finding its way home. Her phone buzzed. Maya's text, Mom, I got in. Full scholarship. Georgetown Law. Grace read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. She looked at her father's name carved in stone. She got in, she whispered. Your granddaughter. She's going to finish what you started. The sunset painted everything gold. Grace stayed until darkness fell, the city lights below glittering like the chandeliers that had witnessed her transformation. Invisible to visible. Silent to heard. Survived to thriving. 6 months later, Grace stood in the same ballroom where it began, but now the marble floors hosted something different. The Caldwell Foundation's inaugural scholarship ceremony. 50 students, black, brown, brilliant, receiving full rides to law school. Maya stood among them, cap and gown catching light. She caught her mother's eye and smiled. Grace approached the podium. The same spot where Marcus had raised his toast, where his empire had begun its collapse. Full circle. My father taught me that power isn't what they give you, she began. It's what you already have that they don't know about. The students leaned forward, hungry for wisdom earned through survival. I spent 52 years being invisible, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting, learning, preparing. She paused, and when the moment came, I was ready. She thought of Marcus, last she heard awaiting trial in the apartment a fraction of his tower's size. His empire dismantled, his legacy erased. This isn't a revenge story, Grace continued. It's a reminder. Systems built on hate will always crumble. They're houses of cards waiting for one breath of truth. I was that breath. Not because I sought destruction, but because I refused to disappear. The room was silent, reverent. To every person who's been told they don't belong, who's been made invisible, who's been underestimated. Grace's voice strengthened. Your power is already yours. They just don't know it yet. And when you're ready, when the moment comes, don't hesitate, breathe. Applause erupted. Maya wiped her eyes. Grace stepped down from the podium and walked to where her daughter waited. They embraced. 2 generations of brilliance, one no longer hidden. Outside, the city moved on. But in that ballroom, in that moment, 50 students carried a new truth into the world. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed. And sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply refusing to stay silent. Grace looked up at the chandelier one last time. Where she'd once been nothing, she was now everything. The light caught her face. She smiled. Justice, it turned out, had always known exactly where she lived.